This is going to be a brief screencast about creating mean APIs with Plunker and Cloud9. So what is mean? Mean is actually an acronym for a web application development stack consisting of MongoDB for a database, Express as a web application framework, AngularJS for the client side, and Node.js for the server side. Now actually for this screencast I'm only going to be using the last three. I'm not going to be using a database just yet, but most of the acronym still applies. So here's the tools that are going to be used. Since it's a web application, obviously JavaScript and HTML. From the mean acronym, we're going to get AngularJS from the client side. Also from the mean acronym, we're going to get Node.js on the server side. We're going to do everything in the browser. We're never going to leave the browser. Even these slides are done on Google Slides. We're going to be using a tool called Plunker at this address here to host the client side. Now Plunker is kind of like a enhanced JS bin. It's a really nice tool for creating and sharing ideas that you might have, testing out things and such. It'll make much more sense when we see it. The server side will be Cloud9 at this address here. If you've watched maybe some of my previous videos, you've seen that I am a big fan of Cloud9, especially since the recent upgrade. So another tool is a Chrome browser extension called Postman. I'm going to use this for testing the API. Basically this is a really nice way of making HTTP requests, beats the heck out of curl. And then the Chrome dev tools, or Firebug if you're on Firefox, or the IE developer tools, or whatever's in Safari will probably work for you. So we're going to start with the server side. I've got a new instance in Cloud9. I've called it Ping Pong. You'll see why here in just a second. And I haven't done anything to this. I just created a new instance and left it alone. So the first thing I need to do here is I want to create a package.json file for my Node application so that I can recall the dependencies later on. So I'm going to stub out that file by running npm init, and it's going to ask me some questions here. So like the name of the application. Obviously it's going to be ping pong, the version. We'll go ahead and say 001. Give it a quick description. The entry point index.js, that's fine, we'll create that in a second. Test command, don't need any. Git repository. I want to put something in here because otherwise every time I run npm install it's going to complain that there's no Git repository. Don't need one yet, just have to put a value in there. Everything else I'll leave the same. Tell it that's okay. And now if we look in here we'll see that it created this blank, well not blank, but at least it's created a starter package.json file for us. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and install Express. So I'm going to say npm install --save Express. So npm install is obviously going to install Express. --save is going to update the package.json file so that later on if we move this to a different machine or something, then we can, or put it up on GitHub and somebody wants to download it, then all they have to do is run npm install and it will pull down the required dependencies, and we'll add another dependency later on. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and now we've got Express. Moving right along here, I'm going to create the index.js file where our code will live for the server. Rename it index.js and open it up. And the first thing I'm going to do is pull in the Express framework. And then create an instance of a server using Express. Now what I want is I want a router to map my endpoints to handler functions, my HTTP endpoints to handler functions. And then I'm going to write my first route. So router.get, and the name of this is going to be ping. And the handler function, we'll just use an anonymous function here. That'll take a request and a response. And all it's going to do is it's going to return back a JavaScript object, which will be transformed to JSON automatically for us by Express. And it's going to return a message, which will be pong. This is why it's called ping pong. And the method being used, because we're going to add post here in just a minute. So that looks good. And then the only thing what I need to do is I need to tell the app to use the router, and the backslash means that's the base address. So basically we're not adding anything. Sometimes if you were going to do an API, you would add a specific API base address there, but we don't want one in this case. And then just use the router. And then we want to start the app by calling the listen method, and we're going to give it a port and an IP, and since we're on Cloud9 we have to use the special port and IP environment variables, which are process.env.port, all caps, and process.env.ip. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go down here, node index.js. And it looks like nothing's happening. Well, that's because it's running. I'm going to switch over here to this tab to Postman. And I'm going to test this out. So the format for URLs on Cloud9 is a little bit interesting. So HTTP and then the name of the instance. So in this case, ping pong. -C9 the username. Now my username here is binary chef with an interesting spelling. Then .c9.io, and then our endpoint, which is ping, and get. So if we hit send, we get back the JSON that we would expect. Great. So now let's make the client side. We're going to use Plunker for this. And like I said, this is kind of like a paste bin, but with so much more. So all you have to do to sign up for this is use a GitHub account. Same thing for Cloud9. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to launch the editor. And this is going to create a new Plunk. So one of the nice things about Plunker is it gives you a very nice way to add to manage JavaScript libraries. So we want AngularJS, that just happens to be the most popular one. If I'm going to click on this more, it'll show me all the versions that it has available, and I'm going to get the most recent stable version, which is 1.2.22. And then I'm going to click this add button, and I'm going to hide this, and it's going to add it up here. Now what I like to do is I like to have my scripts in the body. So I'm just going to very quickly copy and paste these guys into the body. Okay. So Plunker, when it creates a new Plunk, it gives you a README, which can be used for metadata, obviously an index file for your HTML, a JavaScript file, and a CSS file that we're not going to worry about. The JavaScript file, however, that's where we'll obviously put our Angular code. It's referenced from the HTML file. Real quick, I want to set up the HTML file. So I'm going to have an Angular app and call this demo app. Then the body is where I'm going to have a controller on the body. I'm going to call it demo controller and give it another name here. Then the h1 tag, I'm going to remove this default text and I'm going to bind some data to it. I'm going to bind a property called MSG for message. and then I'm going to include a button to get the whole process started. And when it's clicked, it will run a method called ping get, and we'll make that clear. Alright, let's go over to the server now. I believe that's all we need. And let's create our application. So we're going to start off by creating a new module, and it's going to be called demo app, and it's not going to have any dependencies. However, the controller that we create, which will be called demo controller, is going to have a dependency on the HTTP service, because we're going to be making HTTP requests to our API. And we'll go ahead and create the logic for this controller, pass it the HTTP service. Now, since we're going to be switching contexts quite a bit, or at least some in here, this variable, the context of it is going to change. So what we want to do is we want to save the context for this variable that we're currently in. So I'll create a variable called that and get the current value of this. Then I'm going to create a method called ping that will be called ping get, that will be triggered by the button, and it's going to be a function. And what it's going to do is it's going to call get on the HTTP service. And what we want is we want this URL right here. And what will happen next is we're going to call then. Now this is what's known as a promise. It's also known as an asynchronous I/O in other circles. But basically, what's going to happen is since this could be lengthy, we're going to return get immediately, and when the HTTP request is finished, it will call the function that's passed to then, which I'll write now. And we'll have some response content in here, and all I'm going to do is that.msg equals response.data.message, which should be pong, and then in parentheses I'm going to put the method. And finish up our semicolons. Awesome. So let's make sure that our server's still running. It is. And now let's run this. And we see the button, and we click it, and nothing happens. To see why, let's go into the Chrome DevTools, and we see down here, XML HTTP request cannot load our URL because no access control origin header is present on the requested resource, so that the origin from Plunker is not allowed access. So what we need to do is we need to tell our server that we don't mind Plunker accessing this endpoint. The resource is the endpoint, the ping endpoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this header. I'm going to go over here, and before I send the response, I'm going to add a header to it with that value, and then I want to tell it to allow access to this particular URL. And now I'm going to save this. I'm going to quit the server because I didn't set the debug to automatically refresh, and we'll run it again. Okay. Now we'll go back to Plunker, and if I hit ping get this time, we see that we get pong and get. So it's working. Awesome. We're able to make get requests to our API. Now let's change things up and do a post request. And actually the post request to do it, I'm just going to copy and paste because we're going to do the exact same thing with a few changes. First of all, we're going to make a post request instead of a get request, and we're going to return the post method. Alright, let's go over to Postman now and test this. And to test this, all we have to do is change the method to post. We're not going to send any data. We're going to hit send, and we get back, it says cannot post to ping because I need to stop the server and restart it. Let's try this again. There we go. And you can see we're getting back the post method instead. So now how do we change things in Plunker? Well, let's close the dev tools, close the preview, and let's go back to our HTML, and what we'll do is we'll just copy this button and we will paste a new copy of it. We'll call ping post, which we'll write here in just a second, and we'll change the method to post. Okay, that's all we need to do. Let's go back to script.js, and we can actually copy this as well and just change this to post. Change this to post as well, because we're going to call post on HTTP now. And we just want to pass it some data, but we're not passing anything, so I'm just going to pass it an empty object. Okay? So our server's running. Let's start up Plunker. And let's call post. It didn't work. Get is still working, but post is not. So why isn't this working? We've got our access control allow origin header. Let's take a look down here into the dev tools. And let's go ahead and clear this off so we can see what's happening. So let's call ping get. Okay, post get and ping post. XML HTTP request cannot load, but we just saw that we have that header, that we already have that header. So what we need to do to find out what's going on is we need to go back and modify the server. So let's stop the server, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a logging library called Morgan. So we're going to npm install --save Morgan. Now that's installed. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to pull it into my application. Var Morgan equals require Morgan, and then just after our application, I'm going to tell the application to use Morgan, and this will output everything to the console down here. So now when we get a request, we'll see it logged to the console. So I'm going to start my server up again. I'm going to go back here to Plunker. I'm going to hit this ping post again. And it gives us the same error message again. Let's look over here. Oh, this is interesting. It's trying to use the options method. If we hit ping get, then we'll see that we used get. So obviously what it wants is it wants options. Now what I'm going to do here for options, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I need to add a handler for the options HTTP method. So I'm going to say router.options. But I'm not going to do this just for ping. I'm going to do a catch-all. So that's what so for any URL that asks for the options method, this is going to be run first. And because of that, I want this is sort of like a preprocessor. I want this to do some kind of pre-processing, and then I want it to hand off processing to the URL specific handler, which there isn't going to be one in this case, but you would normally do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this header in here, and then I'm just going to call next. So next will be the method that will hand off processing to whatever will be next in the chain. Let's save it, restart the server, and let's go back over to Plunker and let's try again. Now we have a different error. So request header field content type is not allowed by access control allow headers. So basically what happens when you use the access control allow origin header, it restricts the headers that you can use. It's a security thing, but so all we need to do is copy this and go back over here. We'll add another, whoops, we need to add this on options. We'll add another header on options, and we will give it the content type header. We'll save this, and once again we'll restart. Now it works, and if we look over here we can see that it made the options call and then the post call, and if we do ping get, it still works as well. So that's about all. I hope that you see that Plunker, as in addition to Cloud9 and Postman and all of the other things I looked at, are useful tools, and I'd be happy to have any feedback that you would like to give for this screencast. Thank you for watching.